Sometimes people find it a challenge to understand what the battle shock is. What's the difference between the steps of command phase and battle shock's command phase? What is a leadership test? Can I use insane bravery, the stratagem, before something happens to my unit and they get battle shock? Well, today on Rapid Fire Tactics, episode 23, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. Hopefully you enjoy. Stay tuned and locked in. Battle shock, leadership, insane bravery, and some other relevant rules that are related to battle shock explained. All right, so starting off with battle shock. So wanted to break down a lot of the rules that happen in the battle shock portion of the game itself, right? The phase or the step itself. And we're going to talk about that exactly here. In this step, you must take a battle shock test for each of your units on the battlefield that is below half strength. You can check this on the app by searching for it or on page 12 in the core rules book. To do so, roll 2d6. If the result is greater than or equal to the best leadership characteristic in that unit, which is very pertinent, right? It's the best leadership characteristic, not the general or the overall, is passed. Otherwise, the test is failed, and until the start of your next command phase, that unit is battle shocked. While the unit is battle shocked, the objective control of all the models is 0. If the unit falls back, you must take a desperate escape test, and for every model in that unit, and its controlling player cannot use stratagems to affect that unit. And we'll also talk about how, if you're actually being affected by a stratagem and then get battle shock, how that affects you as well. So once you have taken battle shock tests for all of your units that require them, your command phase ends and you progress to your movement phase.
Yeah, and one thing to add on top of that stratagems thing is something that has been clarified is if you are in the middle of doing an action such as sabotage or recover assets and you get battle shocked, you can still complete it even though you're at 0 OC. The rule is you cannot start an action if you're at 0 OC, so it does not interrupt actions anymore.
Correct. So if a repositioned unit is below half strength, and it is not on the battlefield during your command phase, it must take a battle shock test as if it was your command phase after it has been set back up. Very important in the FAQ. And if you want any of this information, it's in the FAQ, the rules commentary.
And this is most pertinent for things that have what is cool in the community known as uppy downy. Go back into reserves at the end of your opponent's turn, or the repulsor rule, where you can, if something's declared as a charge, infantry unit can get back in the repulsor. So GW added this to say you can't dodge the battle shock by not being on the battlefield at the end of your command phase.
That's a good point you bring up. Absolutely. So going into another FAQ question: if a rule takes effect in the command phase and doesn't explicitly state that it happens in a battle shock step or at the end of the command phase, ergo the Tyrannid, Shadow, and the Warp Army rule, does it always take place in the command step? And also, just wanted to remind everyone, this is Thomas. He's the faction specialist in Tyrannids. So this is a great opportunity for him and myself to explain to everybody what battle shock is all about. And the answer for this one is yes.
This one was actually added specifically for Tyrannids because back in Leviathan, it wasn't specific. So savvy opponents would just say, it's my command phase, I have priority, so I'll do it in the battle shock step and play insane bravery, which we will also get to later, and just pass on this critical unit. Something to note about this, though, it is still your turn and you choose order of events. So if you're playing guard or tactical brigade or have another army where you can hand out buffs like AdMech, you can set all your buffs up first. Sisters with the Triumph to choose the aura of +1 leadership. Gilliman giving you reroll leadership battle shock tests. You do potentially have the chance to choose those, then start rolling your Shadow and the Warp battle shock rolls. but it must be
Great
done
point.
before the battle shock step in any case.
Great point you bring up. Each time a unit becomes battle shocked, do the effects of any previously used stratagems that are still affecting that unit stop applying? No.
This is very important because there are phases outside of your command phase where you can be battle shocked, and there are many defensive stratagems that say at the beginning of X phase, use them. So this is one of those, and I know, General Slaughter has done episodes on timing. This is one of the cases where timing is very important, because once you are battle shocked, you can't retroactively, with that knowledge, go back and say, I want to use a strat now.
Absolutely. And this is a great point talking about Tyranids for this question. Is it possible for a unit to be made to take battle shock tests in both the command step of the command phase and the battle shock step of the command phase? Yes.
Yep. I believe there are one or two other armies that have tricks to make isolated battle shocks happen, but specifically for Shadows in the Warp, they happen in the command phase. And even if you have, say 2 orc boys holding on to that objective, didn't quite do it, you still have to take the normal test after, because they are below half, which is in the original battle shock baseline rules.
Next question. Can a unit be made to take more than one battle shock test in the battle shock step of the command phase? No, but a unit can be made to take more than one battle shock test in all other phases, as well as the command step of the command phase.
This came along because of a not common, but a rule multiple armies have that say it modifies the original battle shock quota from below half strength to just below starting strength. So now, instead of needing a 5 or 4 wound rhino, if your rhino is at 9 wounds, it has to take the test. And what happened was people were compounding this, saying, oh, you're below starting and below half by the nature of being below half, so you got to take 2 now. NGW said, nope, just 1 either way, but you still got to take it. In the battle shock step of the command phase specifically. Command step battle shocks are still equally on the table.
All right, now heading on to the leadership portion. Leadership, LD. This reveals how courageous, determined, or self-controlled a model is. The lower this number, the better a model's leadership is. And this is part of the characteristic portion in the core rules. So you can find this on there as well. And then the leadership test. If a rule requires you to take a leadership test for a unit, roll 2d6. If the total is greater than or equal to the best leadership characteristic in the unit, that test is passed. Otherwise, it's failed.
And there's a couple important distinctions here, whereas leadership sounds like it's the same as battle shock and they're heavily intertwined, but they are not. The most prominent example is Exalted 8-Bound currently in the game, where it is you have to pass a leadership test to fall back from them, and anything that buffs battle shock, such as reroll battle shock tests or the Tyranid synapse giving them 3d6 instead of 2d6, are not applicable to that. Other things are Sister's Miracle Dice, where you can just sub in one of them for a battle shock test. You cannot do it for a leadership test. They are separate tests. The other thing to note is you cannot modify your leadership to better than a 4-up, or a 4. So things that give you +1 leadership or improve a leadership test by 1 or 2, you cannot make a Prime Mark a 3-up, for example. And you cannot worsen it to a 9. The leadership characteristic, though. This is important because there are things that modify leadership characteristics as well as battle shock in leadership tests. Right. For example, Death Leaper gives you a -1 to your leadership, but the Synapse Aura gives you a -1 to the battle shock test caused by Shadows in the Warp. So if you were theoretically a leadership 8 orc, for example, you could need a 10 to pass that test because your leadership characteristic is still at 9. There's just an additional -1 on the test itself. There are many ways. There are plenty of armies that can do that. Demons have multiple debuffs. Chaos Knights can get a couple debuffs in there potentially. So it is good to know that your leadership number will never go lower than 4 or higher than 9. but that test result you need could very well be 10, 11, or 12.
Thank you for that great information, Regal. And now on to Insane Bravery. All right. So Insane Bravery has seen some changes throughout the edition. This is the FAQ version where you can actually see the green portion that is added on is new information and what has been made as of a change. Insane Bravery is 1 CP when the Battleshock step of the command phase just before you take the Battleshock test for a unit from your army. That unit from your army, you automatically pass that Battleshock test. But this stratagem can only be used once per game.
So a couple things that are very important about this is the first thing it says when the Battleshock step of your command phase. So any of those early Battleshock tests happening in your command step, such as shadows or other relevant abilities that may trigger them, this cannot be used on those. This is only the ones that occur in the Battleshock step. The second thing, and this is the most common mistake I see, it is no longer retroactively used. It is before you take the Battleshock test. You cannot roll and then fail and say, actually, I need that 1 CP. Because this does fall under that one of the clauses on the first slide we had, where once you are Battleshock, you can no longer be affected by stratagems. And then the last one is this is a once per battle, so you have to use it wisely, because you do not get to use it on turn 2 and then decide, oh crap, I need it on turn 5. Well, you already used your 1 per battle.
Great information. Thank you, Regal. And now for our outro. Thank you to everyone, as always, for watching and staying locked in. Thank you so much, as always, to Regal for bringing his specialty, his faction specialist abilities to help us out understand exactly what Battleshock is, leadership, and how and when to use Insane Bravery as well. Got anything to say, Regal, before we head out from RFT 23?
Not, as always, it's a pleasure to be on here, and I hope people, go forward understanding how and what Battleshock affects the game.
Absolutely. And thank you so much to everyone, as always. And don't forget, Onslaught Gaming 40K, where victory is just a strategy away. Have a wonderful night, everyone.